Oh, so Alberta and Saskatchewan think they can just waltz into British Columbia, negotiate a pipeline deal without actually inviting British Columbia to the conversation, and expect everything to go smoothly? Bold strategy. Let's see how that's working out for them. Spoiler alert, David Eby is not impressed, and he's got some things to say about premiers making decisions about his province without him in the room. Welcome back to Canadian Insights, where we break down the political drama that makes our country simultaneously fascinating and frustrating. Today, we're diving into what might be the most passive-aggressive interprovincial feud of the year, and trust me, it's giving major planning a surprise party for someone who explicitly said they don't want a surprise party energy. So here's what's happening. Multiple sources are telling us that Alberta Premier Danielle Smith and the federal government are apparently days away from announcing a memorandum of understanding. Sounds boring, right? Wrong. This MOU could include changes to the industrial carbon price and, here's the kicker, support for a brand new pipeline to the West Coast. Oh, and this pipeline would need an exemption from the federal tanker ban. You know, that little piece of legislation that's been in place since 2019 specifically to protect British Columbia's north coast from oil tankers. Minor detail. Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe has also jumped into the mix, announcing that he's involved in ongoing negotiations about a potential pipeline deal. So now we've got two prairie premiers negotiating terms for a project that would run through British Columbia, require changes to British Columbia's environmental protections, and affect British Columbia's coastal communities. Notice anyone missing from these discussions? That's right. British Columbia. David Eby, the BC Premier, went on CTV Power Play and basically said what we're all thinking. He was caught off guard by the reported terms of this deal and learned about the details the same way the rest of us did, through the media. Imagine finding out your neighbors are planning to build a highway through your backyard by reading about it in the newspaper. That's essentially what happened here. Eby didn't hold back either. He pointed out that there was certainly no discussion about a meeting between Saskatchewan, Alberta, and the federal government to negotiate terms for a project that would be delivered in British Columbia without British Columbia at the table. It's like being left out of the group chat where everyone's planning something that directly affects you. Except instead of missing out on weekend plans, you're missing out on decisions about major infrastructure projects in your province. Now let's talk about this tanker ban for a second, because it's kind of important. The ban was enacted in 2019 and it prohibits oil tankers carrying over 12,500 metric tons of crude or persistent oil from docking, loading, or unloading at ports on the BC North Coast. This wasn't just random legislation pulled out of thin air. It was put in place after extensive consultation with coastal First Nations and environmental groups who understand what's at stake in that region. Eby's argument is that lifting this ban would threaten projects already in development and undermine the consensus that's been built among coastal First Nations. These communities have a say in what happens on their traditional territories, and suddenly changing the rules without their input is not exactly what you'd call respectful consultation. But here's where Eby really brought the heat. He compared Smith and Moe to tourists wearing sandals wandering off into the woods on the north shore of Vancouver saying they'll be fine. His exact words were they don't know what they're talking about. And honestly, that's one of the most Canadian ways to tell someone they're out of their depth. No yelling, no dramatic accusations, just a calm observation that these two premiers are essentially hiking into bear country in flip-flops acting like they know the trail. This tension between Eby and Smith isn't new. They've been going back and forth for months now, and things really escalated in October when Smith announced that Alberta would fund the initial planning stages of a pipeline project despite not having a single private sector company willing to actually build the thing. Let that sink in. The government is funding planning for a pipeline that no company wants to construct. Eby called it out immediately, saying Smith's proposal is not a real project and is incredibly alarming. When asked if he could find some middle ground with Smith, especially given the current climate with US trade threats and the need for economic diversification, Eby was pretty clear. He said Smith wants the tanker ban rescinded without a single company coming forward to build a pipeline. It's like demanding someone knock down a fence before you've even decided if you want to build a house. But Eby isn't just saying no to everything. He acknowledged that British Columbia gets it, that Alberta wants more access to tidewater. He even said they're spending political capital to work on solutions. His proposal? Let's expand capacity at the Trans Mountain Pipeline, also known as TMX. Now, this is interesting because British Columbia fought against TMX for years. Eby himself acknowledged they fought it tooth and nail and it was imposed on them by Ottawa. But now he's saying, look, let's be pragmatic and figure out how to expand what we already have rather than starting from scratch with a new pipeline in a sensitive area. This week, The BC government actually backed a proposal to increase capacity to the Trans Mountain Pipeline by 40%, with results potentially coming as early as 2026. That seems like a reasonable compromise, right? Use existing infrastructure, avoid new environmental risks, get Alberta more access to export markets. Everyone wins. But when Danielle Smith was asked if an MOU without a new pipeline would be enough if BC agreed to increase TMX capacity, she gave a one-word answer. No. She said what we're seeing is a change in public dialogue about the need for oil and natural gas. Smith acknowledged there's more work to do on the technical side before reaching an agreement with Ottawa, but she remains very hopeful. She also reiterated that she wants to submit a formal application for a pipeline to the Major Projects Office by spring 2026. So where does that leave us? We've got two prairie premiers negotiating with the federal government about a pipeline through British Columbia without British Columbia's involvement. We've got David Eby offering what seems like a reasonable alternative by expanding existing infrastructure. And we've got Danielle Smith saying thanks but no thanks, we want our new pipeline and we want that tanker ban lifted. This is Canadian federalism at its finest, folks. 3 provinces and the federal government all pulling in different directions, each convinced they're right, and none of them quite willing to compromise enough to make everyone happy. It's like watching your family try to decide on a restaurant except the stakes are billions of dollars in infrastructure and the future of environmental policy. The bigger question here is about how decisions get made in this country. Should provinces that would be directly affected by major infrastructure projects get a say in those projects? Most people would probably say yes. Should the federal government be able to override provincial concerns when national economic interests are at stake? Some people would also say yes to that. And should premiers from one province be able to negotiate deals that affect another province without that province being in the room? Well, according to David Eby, that's a hard no. What makes this particularly fascinating is the timing. With tariff threats from the United States, economic uncertainty, and pressure to diversify our trading relationships, there's genuine urgency around energy infrastructure. Alberta makes a fair point that getting more oil to tidewater for export is economically important. But British Columbia also makes a fair point that protecting coastal ecosystems and respecting Indigenous rights matters too. The sandals in the woods comment really captures the whole dynamic. From Eby's perspective, Smith and Moe are outsiders making confident declarations about something they don't fully understand. They're not the ones who would deal with the consequences if something went wrong. They're not the ones who've spent years building relationships with coastal communities. They're just the ones who want the pipeline. So what happens next? Well, we wait to see if this memorandum of understanding actually materializes. We watch to see whether the federal government prioritizes Alberta's economic arguments or British Columbia's environmental and jurisdictional concerns. And we see if anyone actually manages to get all the relevant parties in the same room to have an actual conversation about this. One thing's for sure though. David Eby is not going to let this slide quietly. He's made it clear that British Columbia expects to be part of decisions about British Columbia, which seems like a pretty reasonable baseline. Whether that message gets through to Edmonton, Regina, and Ottawa remains to be seen. If you want to stay updated on this developing story and all the other political drama unfolding across Canada, make sure you're subscribed to Canadian Insights. We're posting multiple videos every day breaking down the news that matters. Hit that like button if you enjoyed this breakdown, and drop a comment letting me know what you think. Should BC have veto power over pipelines through their territory, or should national economic interests take priority? Let's have that conversation in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.